Today, we're digging into the heart of US soccer, what's working, what's broken, and how we can get back to the essence of the beautiful game. We're going to be joined by Kyle Martino, a man who's been at every level of soccer, from the national team to running for US soccer president. He's also had some fascinating insights recently, including a conversation with new US men national team coach Pochettino about the raw, unstructured play of street soccer and how that is the way to go. We'll explore how countries with less infrastructure develop better players, how the US can get back to a more creative style of play, and the influence of social media and technology on today's youths.
On the board. Yeah, I'm on the board. I'm on the board. Yeah, and if you don't know, now you know I'm on the board. I'm on the board.
So Kyle, I'm going to cut to the chase. You just ran for president of US Soccer. What made you want to do that and why?
Oh, man. Yeah, I think initially, I'm trying to go back to that feeling, and it all started when the U.S. men failed to qualify for the World Cup. That kind of broke my heart as a soccer fan. And in the aftermath of that, just didn't really hear any of the issues of consequence being raised. And so, really that crazy decision to, at the time, leave NBC and go do it was just about making sure that, the ideas and the accountability were there, and as much as I could, I wanted to bring it to the table. And with 8 candidates, I finished second, so I never really thought there was a path to victory. But towards the end, it was like, oh man, what do I do if I actually win this thing? And so yeah, it was one of the best losses I took in my life, and really what I ran for, the reason. Being trying to do what I can to leverage my past, my experience, my network, my ideas to see if I can move the needle a little bit. Yeah, right when I lost, that's when I actually kind of went down the path of what I wanted to do as president and started to get to work.
Okay. So it was probably a good thing you came second then. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I think so. That's what any athlete say it is. Yeah, it's okay that I took a loss.
I know.
Right?
So are you going to run again?
I can't imagine. I would never say never, but I'm I think in the perfect position for me in terms of what I'm interested in, what I'm good at, and what I can do for the game. And I think being on the outside and helping as an instrument is the best use of my abilities at this point. And I have taken a position with US Soccer to help them as an advisor and as a consultant, and I think that's a nice way to lend a hand. There's some incredible people inside the organization. I'm a big fan of Cindy Parlow-Cohn, the president, and JT Batson, the CEO. So just kind of here as a guy on the outside that gets to do things that US Soccer can't do as a big organization, and see how I can help out strategically to move the game forward for them.
That's awesome. So it's obviously great that you're going to stay involved in the initiatives and the philosophies that you want to promote and working alongside the US Soccer Federation, because obviously you are a strong advocate for street soccer, which is, you cut me open and that's kind of what I bleed. So this conversation should go pretty well. So with US soccer culture specifically, what do you think the deficiencies are and the problems, I guess, in the culture and the system that's in place? And ultimately, what is stopping the US from developing a conveyor belt of creative players like other countries that maybe have less resources?
Yeah, I mean, the last part of that question, I'll answer with Pochettino's words. I posted on Instagram about this the other day. We spent about an hour with him and his staff in Austin, which was pretty incredible. I mean, the guy's just incredibly charismatic. And I posed that question to him, and he saw the Maradona tattoo on my on my forearm, and so right away we had a brotherly love. And I just went through the list of players that inspired me growing up. Obviously starting with Diego, and then my AOL Instant Messenger name was Kyle Ortega 10. Ortega was my next guy, and then Aymar and Gallardo and Riquelme. And so I posed it to him. These geniuses, these creative, phenoms. How does the U.S. create these, and also, like, more importantly, where does he think that creative genius comes from? And yeah, he didn't even take a beat. He said playing in the street. And so,
Wow.
you can, if you hear my name and know nothing about me, I think the first thing you'll find out is I'm on this mission to take a game I've loved so deeply, a game that has been an incredible gift to me in my life, and it's become an entitlement in this country. And yeah, my main drive is, I believe the social enterprise side of this, right? Soccer as a health and personal wellness instrument meets this incredible, apex of the best way to produce players historically, and the type of players you're mentioning. It comes from access being hyper local. And when you consider, in this city I'm sitting in right now, there are 2,000 basketball courts. It's like, yeah, we don't have an access problem. We don't have an inventory problem. We have a construct problem in how we think about the sport of soccer, and how we've shaped the way that you're supposed to engage with it. And it's just, if we did nothing else, best way to create a culture of the game that fuels a conveyor belt, as you say, for creative players, but also um, competitive top level teams. Turn soccer into what basketball looks like, and you'll get there.
Right, right. That's a great point. Well made. So, with regards to where you grew up, okay, your childhood, to go back a step, yeah, you grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, right? So, what was it like
A
then?
little bit, and then I grew up
And
mostly in Connecticut. So I'm born in
okay,
Atlanta, and then grew up mostly in Connecticut.
okay. So, for someone back in that generation, all right. So obviously, soccer was more nascent then than it is now. And what inspirations, did you draw from to inspire you to become the player that you were? And how did that shape your style of play? And
Yeah,
was there like a street soccer community there? I mean, how did that?
yeah,
What did that look like?
yeah. Really good question. So I would say, my first inspiration being Diego Maradona. My you know Soccer for me, it started as a living room game, with my brothers, and I'd take the broom and unscrew the end of it and put it on stools and put a blanket over that. So, really, it was like utility. No one had to show me that. That's how it kind of started before I got into any organized, pickup or play outside of the house. And then, my next door neighbor had an amazing. They were Dutch. They had an amazing bank of videos, and I found a Diego Maradona one day, and just slowly got to South American, culture. It was kind of like Dutch culture with old IX videos, and then, watching these South American players and the style and the flair that they brought to the game. And so, right away, I knew I wanted to play like this. I knew that was like that athletic and playful and entertainment based nature that was interesting to me. And I grew up playing competitive basketball too. So to me, Allen Iverson was a hero of mine, and Diego Maradona was a hero of mine. It's like, to me, that this looked like the exact same way to go about the game. It was very playground style. It was street smart. It was entertaining and trick based, but with an endpoint, right? With performance and utility, always the focus of it. And so, my access to the game at that point was through, organized rec and travel play. But where I lived in Connecticut, there was a Hispanic community that would play indoor and on blacktops, in Bridgeport and in Westport in one of these gyms. And then one of my close buddies that's in Buttle, when we were little, his dad had a bunch of Caribbean friends in Mount Vernon that would play, any surface they could find, parking lots, inside a gym. And so it just, no one told me, but it just became obvious that playing on hardscape and playing this small style of play with no goalies was just the best way I was going to get a lot of reps. It was the best way I was going to have a laboratory to try all these things that I saw in games, or try all these things that, it wasn't like YouTube back in the day. We saw these little clips of everyone doing moves. You just watched really how you should see the game, which is Diego and the real Ronaldo and Zidane and all these guys doing these things, in a match when it matters, and just taking these little, visions I would see of how these guys play and how they collect the ball and what they try to do, and do it against a wall, if I couldn't find anyone. But the second you can find someone, you've got a game. When you find three people, you've got a tournament. And just pick up in small-sided soccer was how I developed my game, and hardscape was how I became. I think the player with flair and ideas and balance, that I attribute to that completely.
So you sound like you're almost ahead of your time, really, with regards to the way you developed. You mentioned those the neighbours that were Dutch, and it's so interesting to see how different cultures and different environments can alter the way you play. I think basketball's a great analogy for street soccer because arguably the best basketball players are the street basketball players. And I always say that the first stage of street football or street soccer or playing in the garden with your brother or whatever is a source of inspiration. So for you, it was watching Diego Maradona. For the kid that likes basketball, even me as a white guy in Birmingham in England, I was wearing my 23 Jordan jersey and, pretending to do a dunk on a basketball hoop that was probably 4 foot off the ground.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the same. It's the same process, and I do see that. Like you've got some great initiatives that you've rolled out. I'd like to talk about those. So you've got Street FC that you're involved with. You've got
Mhm.
Golfer, Over Under, and No One Home. So do you want to
Yeah.
just talk about them and how those initiatives ultimately at scale, as you might see them, how that could affect the culture and help maybe player development at the top end?
Yeah, I mean, all my companies, like, it's kind of an accidental studio fund to, most importantly, remove the friction between people and football. Just it's the number one sport on the planet because it tends to be very easy to find, very gender neutral, age neutral, socioeconomic neutral to play and continue to play. So, I started with over under first. The first mission was we need soccer, the idea of it, to live in proximity to those that need it most, those that tend to make up the greatest, teams on the planet. And there's a documentary, Concrete Football, about that area north of Paris that have produced
Yeah,
so
amazing.
many great players over the years. And for me, it was just such an aha moment where, traveling the world as a player, every single port I saw had a basketball hoop and a soccer goal under it. So it was like, well, listen, why don't we just start with the obvious point of, if it's difficult to get players onto fields, let's just get them to a court on their way to a field. And tracked a bunch of basketball courts in New York City, noticed that no one was using them, and it's a mistake to turn it into something else. So the first thing was, over under was a mission to get goals under basketball hoops in cities. It turned out that no Parks Group was going to allow that permanent structure under a basketball hoop. Also, I couldn't find any companies that made these goals that go under basketball hoops. So, Golfer came next, out of just a need. You know, the idea of a multi-sport court in these cities was attractive to the gatekeepers, Parks and Rec, but absent a solution, and a Parks and Rec director in Brooklyn gave me the idea. I said, Kyle, yeah, you guys can come play soccer on our basketball courts. The goals just have to disappear afterwards. And I think he was kind of being like, get out of here. Like, it's never happening. Yeah, I guess he didn't know who he was dealing with. So yeah, the golfer came next, just went and yeah, spent time trying to design a solution out of cardboard in my kitchen one night at like 4 a.m., came up with the first model and prototype. And then an amazing group in the Midwest called Keeper Goals, that are one of the oldest manufacturers of sports equipment in this country, just agreed to help me fabricate this prototype. And fast forward to, there's 16 cities that have Golfer on their blacktops, where kids can just come on and pull it up and play soccer when they want, and put them back down and play whatever other sport that they were intending on the day. So yeah, that was really the beginning of me believing, I could be an entrepreneur, and
Wow.
also realizing I was going to have to stay with this illness of finding problems and trying to solve them myself. And so, yeah, the next one was Street FC. That I started with the founder of Foursquare, Dennis Crawley, and it was pretty simple. It's like, we've got a lot of spaces where people would be playing soccer, uh, a lot of people, an dense population of people that don't play soccer or do play soccer and are not satisfied or satiated in proximity from these courts. What if an app, or what if a tech instrument, kind of like how Soul Cycle, those women got people back into a room riding a bike. How can we get people on these courts playing soccer? And Street FC was just realizing everyone else created an administrative instrument to play pickup, and that wasn't going to be good enough. And so, yeah, I was out to build a football club, and so Street FC came next, and yeah, that's in. I think we're in our 15th or 16th city now. We played
Wow.
10,000 street soccer games, which is just nuts to think about. All these people that never kicked a ball on concrete before, and now 10,000 games of them, doing it. And so that was, that's where the momentum of like, all right, I'm doing this for the rest of my life. And then No One Home, that was really, it was like, okay, the golfer turns anything into a soccer court. Street FC turns any soccer court into a soccer club. And No One Home was my last prong of that, full cultural flywheel of where's the clubhouse, And originally, I started out of the basement of my townhouse in Greenpoint, and I knew it worked. It wasn't entirely legal, so I was like, "Yeah, let me shut this down before this gets sticky." And yeah, no One Home is the real life dream of, whether you play football or not, whether you like the game or not. Like, where does the culture of the game meet to congregate, to socialize around the greatest game on the planet?
Wow. So everything you do is, it's community based. I like the fact there's almost like a hub and spoke model. You've got the location where people can gather, socialize, drink coffee, and watch the game, and then you've got this extension of spaces to play, and converting spaces to play into soccer spaces to play. And I think it's an amazing project and at scale. One question I would ask you is, you've got the spaces to play with the coaching model, let's say, that's in place in the US currently, and I'd say a large percentage of the children out there, a big percentage, because of the pay to play model, can't afford it, so they get excluded from playing at a higher level. And then you've got the kids that can afford it, where their only exposure pretty much is in a very structured environment. So I think, what would be your approach to the kind of coaching philosophy or the coaching system that's currently in place in the US to support the production of these players that we all want to watch in the US team winning
Yeah,
the World Cup?
yeah. I mean, to be honest, the world I'm building and the world I focus on every day, really coaches aren't supposed to be a part of. Yeah, the coaching in this country has absolutely gotten better, and environments have gotten better. And for me, pay to play, there's absolutely problems with pay to play. But what we have to realize is, pay to play exists in every country, and unfortunately growing even more abroad than before. And it's not really at this point about pay to play being an issue that you solve by addressing that. In my opinion, we have to prove there's an alternative, not a zero sum game of either go this way or go that way. Like, the greatest players are created and born on blacktops when coaches are not around. That's really about facilitators. To me, that's the big difference that is vitally important to understand, is that whether a kid has access or not, we have an issue where kids aren't enjoying the game, and kids aren't getting in environments that are unstructured, that tend to breed identity, like expressive nature, and also get you a lot of reps on the ball. And so I kind of look at the entire pyramid and the pathway having an issue where kids are not accessing, whether they're in the club system or not, a very hyper local, spontaneous way to participate in the sport of soccer. So for me, I don't really blame the coaches or the coaching system. There's a lot of things that need to be addressed there, but I think we need to help coaches by not pushing this paradigm and this construct that at 9 years old they should be training 3, 4, 5 times a week or traveling 2 hours to go kick a ball. Really, like where coaching starts to come in my opinion, and have a true impact on the quality and trajectory of the development of a player is after this player has already gone and found competency, found creativity, found um, found the basics of the game through playing it and observing how it's supposed to be played and being around older kids that could be mentors for them. That to me is the greatest way to breed a player ready for good coaching. I think the coaches across this country are unfortunately just getting thrown a structure in which they got to fit into, and even if they don't agree with it, it's how they're having to go about the system. So the world I'm building is almost like the setup to great coaching. It's like, listen, kids need to. Johan Cruyff has an amazing quote. He said, I trained 3 hours a week at Ajax and played 3 hours a day in the street. Where do you think I learned to play football? And so it's like, we need to help coaches in this country by not expecting them to be the only source of inspiration, of education, of empowerment. The greatest thing we can do for these coaches is create an entire world outside of that structure where kids are finding competency or finding creativity or finding a passion and enjoyment and an inspiration that comes from spontaneous play. And feeding these coaches, kids that are coming with ideas, that are coming with skill sets, and then the coaches in that environment giving them structure and giving them a way to connect with other players and connect into a system. What's great about that is then they can take some of those ideas when there's freedom to go do so and go back to the pickup space and test this stuff. And also, kids can trade ideas that are coming from different coaches and different systems. So it's just that's the world that I think we have to build, and we would make a huge mistake if we don't use 2026 to do so, which is whether it's a club kid that can afford to play or a kid from West Africa that just got here and lives in Queens and hasn't kicked a ball in a year since he moved under these circumstances. It's like these kids need to be meeting at a space that's theirs, that someone enables. And this is the type of environment that every other country has that creates the greatest players on the planet. And so I want that world for the kids that can access soccer and the kids that can't access soccer. And the next part of the pyramid is where the resources, the empowerment, and the the upward mobilization and pathway for coaching should exist as well. But like my universe that I'm focusing on is the base of the pyramid that we have not yet spent enough time, innovation, and resources to ensure this country has, like every other country.
Amen. Amen. Hallelujah. This guy, we need you as president. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what their decision was to make you become second choice.
Honestly, it's probably a good thing. I don't think I would have gotten any.
Is there a phone number I can ring or something? I give him a call today a few times. But no,
you know what, man? I'll say this is like, U.S. soccer, this isn't their problem to solve. I think it's really easy to point the finger at MLS or U.S. soccer. And like, what we have to realize is like, we are a great soccer nation. I'm an Italian American that we had, to me, I would go watch the Bridgeport and Brooklyn Italians when I was little. I mean, we've had football for a long time in this country. It's not just getting here. And so I think people forget U.S. soccer was this tiny little mom and pop shop. And now it's a couple hundred employees, and now they have a couple $100 million a year to spend, and they're this big thing. But really, U.S. soccer is going to step up, and absolutely the legacy of the 2026, with Soccer Forward and the other things U.S. soccer are doing, they're finally equipped, financing wise and personnel wise, to address this issue. But we can't wait for these groups. It's not really something that exclusively either they need to solve or can solve. Like this is something that whether it's soccer in the streets and Street Soccer USA and America Scores and like the Marta stations that Sanjay and all those guys have, and like what VBFC is doing in LA. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and I know you know them, that talk about hub and spoke model. Like there are people highlighting the culture of the game and building pathways to go get involved hyper locally. Really, U.S. soccer just needs to start empowering and amplifying the incredible work that's going on around the country with these small communities that are bringing football in the right way.
No, I agree. So I think, just to go back a step to what you said about the kind of exposure that the young players get in different countries. And I was on a podcast a few weeks ago, a soccer development podcast, and I read this article about how in Brazil, the young players, 70% of their playing time is done without a coach there. And then, there is a coaching culture, and futsal's very tactical, and there is, the Brazilian coaches are very, autocratic when they have their players in a session. But I always say that if the culture, say in the US, if the kids aren't playing out in the streets, like you said, at the base, because ultimately coaching a player should be about building on those players' strengths, and you only get to see what their strengths are and what type of player they're going to be is by letting them play in a free environment, right? Letting them express themselves, seeing what their strengths and weaknesses are. But what I do see in the US as a bit of a trend that was one of the reasons why I started being a bit more vocal is I do see this kind of drill-based culture happening, and it's being amplified by social media where you've got 11 players and they're all doing the moves exactly the same way as the coach does, and that might be the kid's only exposure to soccer. I call it cookie cutter coaching. So if that's the kid's only exposure to soccer, what you end up with is 11 players doing exactly the same skills in exactly the same way. And you know yourself that when you play, the reason why street football is what all of the greatest players acknowledge as the breeding ground, and the very reason that made them the players they are, is actually the absence of the coach is the secret ingredient. So I would say, with regards to a coaching philosophy, I like what you said there. For me, the coach should become more of a facilitator and a guide, and the balance of a coaching session should be more 70% play. And that doesn't mean you have to play in like a full-side game, because street soccer can be a 1 versus 1. It can be a 2 versus 2. It can be multiple players to one goal. When I grew up in England, we played headers and volleys, which was crossing the ball and heading it, and we created our own games. You had 60 seconds, and then if you missed, you went in goal. And it was the kids, creating their own games, and there was conflict. And and the good thing about that is you develop conflict resolution skills, and that's all the nutritious stuff. And I think that's a good segue into my next point. With the societal changes, with the technology that's coming out, I think I read a stat that I think it was the American Pediatrics Association, that in a generation, there's been 30% less unstructured play in this generation compared to the last. Not just soccer, but just kids in general are not going outside and playing like we did as kids. I believe that the players that are being produced now are more fragile, less creative. They're not as gritty as there was. I think even some of the old US teams seem to be a bit more gritty, like when it was like the Clint Dempsey era, and I just don't. It's not just soccer players, but it's the generation of young people in society that are like that, and that's being reflected in the game. So what I would say is with technology and how that's going to be accelerated, and the trajectory of that, there's a lot of soccer companies out there now that are integrating technology. And I believe some of those companies and some of those organizations could be a potential extension of the current problem, which I believe is it's too rigid when a kid goes to a soccer training or practice. So how can we use technology to be a force of good, in your opinion? And how can we solve the problems in society? And I think you're doing a great job of building these community-based programs and forcing kids outside. But I think, how can we use technology for a force of good for street soccer?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I've been thinking about this deeply. And for me, my dad has this amazing saying, if you can't fix it, feature it. It's like we're not getting these out of kids' hands, right? So what we have to do is figure out, like, ultimately, where are the incentives that put them into similar sort of short cycle of endorphin dump and excitement. And to me, it's about gamifying the world of participation. So it's um, a wild example, but we'll get there. Promise me. Stick with me. It's like, Pokemon Go, right? Got people, out of their house, moving around cities and interacting and granted, staring at their phone, walking down the street. But there is a world where, talk about a hub and spoke model. The courts can be the infrastructure, right? Now all of a sudden, think of an incredible street court where it's visually compelling, the type of place that it's your Wembley of playing street soccer. And when you're there, you always see great play, or you always film yourself with some of these guys in the background. You want to get on the court and press. And the street park having a bunch of street courts around it, right? Like think about how football clubs were built in the 15th century, right? All amateurs, like there's a big, beautiful place you want to play, and then a bunch of places around it, right? And so for me, the world is about taking that infrastructure and using technology to create a way to access the game in this spontaneous way, but also to put roadblocks that can only be unlocked by going in and participating. And there, ultimately, what I'm talking about was, what about a play to pay model? Like, what if going out there and engaging with playing the game, or being the facilitator that day and running the game, or being the referee that day and interacting with the game, or being the person that allowed that space to be used for street soccer? What if you just changed the incentives and you use the atom of soccer, which is pick up play, right? This, winner stays. If you have, you know, 4 to 15 people, you've got a match on that court. If we start to create the right incentives where kids, get the same endorphin dump they get from likes, if they get those by being able to go and engage with the game and play with others, to get a bunch of touches, to every time they show up, it be sort of a raffle ticket for what can come next, unlocking a product that's launching at a certain point, unlocking tickets to a game, unlocking your ability to get private training videos for free. If you create the right incentive structure, kids will start to become the ecosystem that runs itself. This, if you build it, they will come, is not true. I've been out there building a lot of stuff for a long time. And, a lot of people say, yeah, in our era, we just used to throw sweaters or jumpers, as you call them, down.
Yeah.
So the reality is these kids are not going to go out, and the type of ingenuity you're talking about, you can't train into kids. You need to just hold space for them to go and develop that on their own. And I just believe deeply, the thesis of everything I'm doing is, if we can nudge them by using technology, apps that unlock services and make them feel better about themselves, and they want to go to the internet to share that story and create a FOMO that can only be satiated by going to the court. If you have that, and then the goals, right? The goals are really, goal for is a way to say, this is yours. Like, this is a street court. Like, don't wait for someone to put something on. Come and pull these goals up and play whenever you want. So I believe if we create the right incentives and we inspire and demonstrate that this world is supposed to happen here, and all of a sudden the type of brands that are going to come and get involved in the next big episodic moments for soccer in this country, you can fuel a subsidized world where people are being paid to facilitate. So people are actually, finding a career and allowing this type of unstructured play to happen. I really do think that there's an entire system and enterprise that can fuel a world that feels nostalgic, that we engaged with for free and no one had to shape for us or tell us to go do it. Like, I think if we just nudge the world in this direction and hold space with infrastructure and technology, these kids are going to take over. And I promise you, they're going to figure it out. They don't need to be told you can play half court soccer. They don't need to be told well, if you only have three people, here's how you're going to play, a winner stays, game today. We have to let them go figure things out for themselves, but we have to be the ones that nudge and create the inertia for that type of spontaneous world that doesn't exist. And I think we do it through, technology in the form of, the goals that invite it, technology in the form of apps and enterprises that combine people that would be a community of players if someone could get them there. And then just step back and get out of the way and let these players find their way to a great system, that I wish was there when I was little, that is subsidized and it does have great coaching. It does have great facilities. It's just that being here and there being such a big gap between those resources, that world, and the universe we're talking about.
Right.
Like that's where technology has to make up the gap.
So I that was a great point. So I read a stat, and that was in the New York Times, and it said 75% of all young soccer players quit at age 14, and one of the main reasons they give is because it's not fun, but also because of digital diversions, as they like to call it. So I believe you're spot on there. How can we gamify and use technology for a force of good? Get these kids outside, incentivize them, like you said, rewards. I mean, there's lots of good things you can do now with the blockchain and the NFT stuff. So I think kind of giving the kids what they are getting online, like you said, these endorphin kicks to get them outside, I think is amazing thing. So. As we kind of draw towards a close of this amazing podcast, I'd want to go back to you as a child, and would you do any differently, and what would be your advice to your younger self? Would you do anything, would you change anything
Yeah.
with your playing experience?
There's only one. I wouldn't say it's a regret. It's a what if that I would have changed. When I was going to University of Virginia, I played one last international tournament that we won in France and played really well. And my mom came to me 3 weeks before I had to report at University of Virginia, and she was like, there was a coach that was for one of the teams that was at that tournament, and like Bayern Munich and Ajax and Barcelona and all these like crazy youth teams were there. She's like, yeah, they kept coming up to us and asking if you wanted to come there and play, and then send a bunch of emails, and they even offered you a contract. I'm like, Mom, what are you talking about? And she was like, some team like Benica. And I'm like, you don't mean Benfica? She's like, yeah. And so finally we got back in touch with the coach, and they were going to offer me a B team contract to train with the first team when I was 18 years old. And sometimes when I'm just sitting there on a long day of travel, I'll daydream of like what would it have been like if I went and did that. So like I think I would have done that, like knowing what I know today and what it was like back then. Today I would have taken that move. Today would have been much more normal, and that would have been an easy decision for me to make. So
Wow.
there's that one. But in terms of like the younger me, honestly, like I developed as a player that was pretty unusual for an American, true number 10, very creative and on the ball and could do things other Americans could do. But I'd say I missed a few moments during my career that coaches were really trying to help me. And the ego in me wouldn't see it that way. And I'll give you an example. One great coach, he's not with us anymore. Ziggy Schmidt, incredible coach. One day at training, when he first got there with the Columbus Crew, he wouldn't call any fouls on me. And so I was getting hammered in training, and I think the players were in on it. And they knew what was up. So I'm just getting creamed all training session and getting really, really frustrated and totally got off my game and was pouting and being a little brat. And think about what this coach was trying to do in hindsight. Like this coach changed an entire structure of a training session for me to try and help me. And not only did I not see it that way, I went the opposite way.
Right.
As a little brat, just I'm not getting fouls called. I'm not even going to get on the ball anymore if this is how this is going to go. And it's like, there's a few moments during my career that coaches will really just trying to get me to the next level. And I wish I could go kind of shake the young little brat kid in me and be like, dude, you have no idea how good you have it that a coach would care enough to try and leave the part of your game that they have no idea how to help and love about you, your creative side, the ingenuity. But in terms of your mental toughness and decision making and right moments, they're really trying to help there, and you don't see that. I really wish I could go back and redo some of those moments for sure.
Wow, that's some good wisdom there. So, Kyle, you have children, right? So,
Yeah.
how many children do you have, and are they in soccer? And are we going to have the kind of Lionel Messi, Thiago Messi thing happening? Mini Martino is taking over U.S. soccer.
Yeah, so I've got three kids. The oldest is a girl, Marlo. The one below her, Major, and then the youngest boy is Mateo. Marlo was into soccer, and it's actually a pretty sad story. I talked about it on my Instagram. Loved it, very social. She was good at it. She always had a big smile on her face. And the second that it turned into at 9 years old, 8, 9 years old, her friends were playing for the club team that was traveling and it was elite. And so she went and did it, and she hated it. She immediately fell out of love. And I would sit there, and I would never say anything on the sidelines with my arms crossed, watching these kids standing there. We drove an hour to get to this game, and they're huddled together, freezing as the coach sets up like cameras and GPS systems. And I'm just like, oh my god, this is
Yeah.
so wrong and so bad. And very quickly, like her mom and I realized, damn, she's not liking this. And we let her finish the season, and she didn't want to do it anymore. And what's sad is she still jumps out in the backyard with us and loves doing that. And I get the sense if it still stayed fun and and non-competitive and local, and it's her friends, she'd still be playing and having a blast. So that's one of the kids. And then the one below her is kind of the opposite. Major, he doesn't need any coaching, any teams, any fields. Like he's like I was. He watches all the games. He goes in the backyard, tries to recreate everything and throw chairs down or anything to be defenders. So he definitely has my hard wiring like that. And he's gotten into his first team, and he's loving it, and he's having a blast playing. And then the youngest is, who knows where he'll end up. He's a beautiful maniac.
I like they all are. So I have two children myself. My daughter's 7, and she's loving soccer right now because obviously she gets my street soccer philosophy, music, and it's all small sided and playing. And that's one of my biggest fears actually, because I just the nature of my daughter Noelle. I just feel it's not going to fit her personality going into this pressurized, we have to win travel team environment, and she's showing real potential, but she's just a pure creative. If she's not doing skills with the ball in the house, she's doing crafts or whatever. And I just don't think I just feel like that pressurized environment too early for a personality type like that will push them back, and they'll just regress, and they won't want to do it no more.
I mean, listen, it's not good for so many reasons that are factual, that are proven. And rather than fight against an endemic and installed way of going about soccer, it's about normalizing the idea that there's another way. There is a way that can happen at the same time. It can happen exclusively. But like, I think that's the power that we need to have as former players or shepherds of the game, is just really make sure that kids and parents know, until you're 12, 13 years old, the most important thing is enjoying it. The second most important thing, and they almost always come together if you get it right, is do it with your friends and do it locally and do it as long as you want. It's like there is a simple math equation, and 2 hours in a car, to play on a big field and get 10 touches. If you put that player on one track against a player that just stayed in their basement and got 10,000 touches that day, it's just you're never going to be able to beat that player in the basement. when you get to 13, 14, and 15 years old, where the coaching and the dynamics and the tactics are all essential. And it's like, I'll take a kid in a basement that has never played structured play until they're 12 years old over a kid that's been in a club system being taught everything all day long. Because as you know, that 12, 13, 14, 15, you can install ideas, and you can show them the things that they need to work on and how they learn. And at that point, they can pick it up pretty clearly. But you can't get a 12, 13, 14-year-old to learn how to, watch a defender's toe flex and crunch, meaning they have weight on that side of their foot, which is actually the foot that you need to attack towards, because they've got to get onto the other foot to stat. It's like these tiny little details of how movement unbalances defenders, and the spirit of, losing, having to sit off with your friends and wait to get back on. It's like these are the things that if they're not ingrained by 12 and 13-year-olds, by the time they're that age, I mean, you can get far, but you can't get high by showing a 9, 10, and 11-year-old structure. It's like, those kids need to be having a blast and playing unstructured, and then put them in the system at 12, 13, 14.
No, I agree. So I think, for me, there's this infectious thing online, like I mentioned earlier, this kind of drill-based coaching. I feel it gets amplified by Instagram and things like that. And I feel like sometimes as parents or coaches, parents feel like there's some sort of race to get good as quickly as possible, as young as possible. And then, these kids will go to these drill-based programs and they perform these different things. And I think to the untrained eye, it does look good, because I feel like there is a knowledge gap there with the average American parent. For me, it's about protecting a child's creativity as long as possible, and then building on that at the right time with the tactics and with the finer details. And obviously, we've mentioned about street football. Every expert, every great player will tell you it's the literal source of why these players became good, but it's also the most fun way to learn. So you have these, like, even the academies, 98% of all players that are in an academy get released and never make the grade. And they've probably not had a good time getting there. And, they
also stopped playing a lot of them, right? Like, that's the other scary part. There's no dropout and come back in.
Yeah. They asked Michael Jordan, what were you doing at 12 years old? In basketball, what level were you at, whatever? And he said, I was playing baseball. So, it just shows that, like you said, at the right age, if you've got this foundation of expression, you've got your own style of play, you're enjoying the game, you can start to get serious in the older years and really make a lot of progression whilst maintaining your true identity as a player. And I feel that will take it a lot further. I always say that the player that knows how to think will go further than the player that's been told what to think. So that's might be a good way to close this. But Carl, I've got one more question. What are you most excited about in US soccer going forward? What does the future look like, and what are your plans for the next few years?
Yeah, I mean, I'm most excited about 2026. I remember 1994 like it was yesterday. Roberto Baggio was one of my heroes, and so that was obviously an amazing and tragic World Cup for him and the people that love him. But I just remember the buzz of after that World Cup. I mean, it definitely stayed for me, and this game I loved since I was little now was in every city and was everywhere. And then all of a sudden we had a league. And so for me, I'm most excited to see what's the legacy of 2026, because being in these rooms and hearing some of the plans, it's pretty special what we could pull off behind what will most likely be the biggest sporting event we'll ever see in our lifetime.
On the board. Yeah, I'm on the board. Yeah, I'm on the board. Yeah, and if you don't know, now you know I'm on the board. Yeah, I'm on the board.
You have been a listener, a viewer to the first ever Global Street Soccer podcast with Kyle Martino. So, go outside, find a patch of dirt, and play. I'll see you out there.